A vivid memory of Matthew 6:33. All of these things will be added to you if you put God's kingdom and righteousness first. It's one of those verses that can be found printed on coffee mugs, stitched on cushions, Instagram photos with gold backdrops, and carved wooden frames hanging in the living room. And maybe that's precisely the issue. When a sentence turns into therefore it stops being true because we stop really hearing it, not because it is no longer true. Although we are aware of the words, we no longer pay attention to them. Every morning, it sounds like a bell. You awaken on the first day. You hear nothing more on the 10th. I would like you to hear this phrase once again, not the last time you heard it. In a sermon, someone quoted it, not as it appears over a photo of a sunset in italics. I want you to hear it just as it sounded that afternoon when Jesus was seated on a hill with a bunch of people who had no guarantees at all, people who relied on the rain and the kindness of the strong to survive, who worked the soil by hand, and who woke up uncertain about whether they would eat. This phrase was not ornamental to these people. It was the most radical, unsettling, and unbelievable thing anyone had ever uttered to them in their whole lives. And this is the question that still has to be asked, and that I believe is worthwhile. What did Jesus actually say? What is this kingdom that Jesus told us to look for first? What is this righteousness that emerges almost immediately, as though it were merely a detail? And what does it actually mean to pursue something first in the lives of an actual human being? Because it seems to me that the majority of the responses we heard to these queries were insufficient given the scope of what Jesus was advocating. Let me think about this for a little while. Jesus was not addressing a religious audience. He wasn't debating abstract ideas in a seminary. He was outside on a mountain with common people all around him. Additionally, his remarks were so specific that they mentioned birds in one phrase and lilies in the next. He made use of pictures from the actual world that those folks were familiar with. To express something that goes well beyond what the word surface implies. And everything changes when you comprehend the context and the meaning of the word kingdom in Hebrew, Aramaic, and the thoughts of a first-century Jew. Everything, not just a little. In Jesus' mind, the word kingdom is malut. Malut is not a place in Hebrew. It's not an area on a map with boundaries. Malkut is a situation. God's will actually takes place in the kingdom as a living reality, a current state, and the world's order. Jesus was not referring to a location you go after death when he spoke of the kingdom of God. He was discussing a reality that can be experienced right now, in this body, on this planet. A reality in which everything is as it should be. Bread reaches everyone, lies do not triumph, and the vulnerable are not crushed by the powerful. When human dignity cannot be compromised. And he was saying, look for this first. Once your financial issues have been resolved, don't look for this. When things are more peaceful, don't look for this. Don't look for this as a spiritual benefit on top of a life that is already well organized. Look for this first. Let everything else rotate around this axis. I want you to take note of something significant here. One of the longest and most comprehensive teachings of Jesus that we have documented is found in the immediate context of Matthew 6:33. What is known as the Sermon on the Mount includes the entirety of Matthew's Gospel's 6th chapter. Additionally, Jesus constructs an argument that many people have read in fragments without understanding that it is a single continuous argument that only makes sense when viewed in its entirety. He starts off by discussing how to fast without performing, how to pray without theatricality, and how to undertake humanitarian deeds without being ostentatious. After that, he takes a sudden turn that makes sense given all he has said thus far. He starts talking about money,
treasures, and where you store valuables. He also states something that not many people take the time to think about. Nobody is able to serve two masters. You will either be loyal to one and loathe the other, or you will love one and hate the other. You cannot serve money and God at the same time. Matthew 6:24 contains this information. Jesus then descends into what appears to be a liberating spiral. He starts talking about how God takes care of plants and animals. He claims that the birds in the air do not weave, harvest, or keep goods in barns. Nevertheless, the Father provides for them. The field's lilies don't work or spin. Nevertheless, not even Solomon in all his splendor was clothed like one of these. He then glances at those surrounding him and says something that ought to have sounded like a comment. How much more will God care for you if he does this for birds and the flowers? He then reaches verse 33. Prioritize seeking God's righteousness and kingdom. However, take note of what comes before in verse 32. The pagans run after all these things, he claims. The countries that are ignorant of the God of Israel are the pagans and Gentiles. They are the ones that spend their entire lives structuring their lives around accumulation, material survival, and the stability that money purports to provide. Furthermore, Jesus is telling you that this is not for you. A different order of existence has been called upon you. This is where the tension starts to show. Since it is simple to read this and come to the conclusion that Jesus was urging people to be careless, not to plan, not to work, and not to consider the future. However, that would be reading the book quickly and, in the end, dishonestly. Jesus was not advocating carelessness. He was advocating for reorientation. He was arguing that worrying about bread isn't the issue. The issue arises when bread takes center stage. When your identity, safety, and worth as a person are dependent on how much you are able to acquire or protect, the majority of us experience that same tension, so that differentiation is crucial. We wish to adhere to God. Our goal is to live honorably. We want faith to be genuine. However, we also need to pay our bills. We've kids to raise. The future is unknown. And sometimes, when fear is choking everything, the question isn't whether you'll pursue the kingdom, but rather if you can even breathe sufficiently to consider it. Jesus didn't say such words to those whose lives were certain. Thus, I believe he was aware of that. He told folks these things, who were significantly less secure than the majority of us are now. Take a time to picture those people's actual circumstances. During the 1st century, Galilee was occupied by the Romans. There were high taxes. The majority of cultivated land belonged to big landowners who were frequently associated with Jerusalem's priestly elite. It is hard for us to fully comprehend the precariousness of a Jewish peasant's life in Jesus' day. Social security, unemployment insurance, and a health system were non-existent. You went hungry if the crop was unsuccessful. Your family would go hungry if you became ill and were unable to work. There was no margin for error. Do not worry about, Jesus say, what you will eat or drink or wear, must have sounded like an almost cruel challenge to these folks. Or something that would only make sense if the promise that goes along with it was genuine. This was the promise. The things you need will be added to you if you put the kingdom first. This new word is intriguing. The word prosthesity in Greek conveys the sense of adding something to something that already exists, as though the kingdom were the base and everything else were